Welcome to another episode of Cheers Steers. I'm author and creative warrior S. Faxon, and today we are joined by David Green, author of In Solitude Shadow, Dead Man Walking, The Devil Walks in Blood, and so much more. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me on. I'm really excited to be on all the way from Ireland to California. It's great.
We are time travelers today, as we were discussing in our messages, and it's fantastic because it's 5 o'clock where you are, it's 9 a.m. where I am, so I get to justify this because it's 5 a.m. in your world. So first, let's start with the cheers. Cheers to our international debut episode here.
Man, I wish I had started at 9 o'clock this morning. That would have been great.
I have coffee loaded after this, so I can continue with my workday. But David, you want to tell us a bit more about your universes?
My universes, yeah. So one of them is In Solitude Shadow, is the first book in the Empire of Ruin series, and it is dark fantasy. Well, it kind of is. It's kind of. I think it's kind of hard to kind of exactly what it is. It is fantasy. And it has like elements of dark fantasy, but it's got epic fantasy in there as well. But it's not like grim dark, although it has elements of that too, because there is like quite there's some things that aren't great that happen in it, and it's not like a nice world to live in, but there's like little bits of hope scattered around there, which was important to get in. So that is like that is one of them. And then the other series that I do is the Nick Holleran series, which is like an urban fantasy noir. So it's kind of, if anyone has ever read the Dresden books, it's kind of like in that sphere, but it's more, he isn't magical like Dresden is. So there is fantasy elements in it and everything. There's like some horror elements and supernatural, but it's very kind of, it's quite noirish as well. And it's just really, really fun that way. I don't like dislike writing the Empire of Ruin series or anything, but Holleran is really just like something that I can just kind of I really get. It's very fun because it's like with the way that I've set up the universe in that one, I can kind of just have so many different things to play with, and I can just like justify it by like going, well, this is the way the world is, right? So it's like if I decide to do this for a little while, it's like it's fine. I can do it because of this, because this is the setup. So it's really, really fun. So I don't have to kind of. Whereas with the and it's also set in the real world as well, so I can. It's a original city, but it's set in Portland in the States, so I can do like people know what the world is really like. Whereas with Empire of Ruin, obviously it's my whole new world and everything, so I've got like laws and rules and everything that I kind of. Sometimes I put myself into a little bit of a box because I'm like I'd really like to do this, but then I'm like I actually can't do this because. I said it's impossible to do.
Yeah, isn't that funny in fantasy how we do have to set our own rules and we're not just limited by the reality that immediately surrounds us, and we have to kind of stick to those rules because if we go beyond that, it's like, is that believable or not? Whereas with Nick's world, you're like, yes, Bigfoot is real, but his feet aren't actually that big. You just set that off right off the bat. So we're like, all right, this is our world. This is where we are. And I accepted every single monster or creation that came at us.
Yeah. That's the funny thing. And with especially with stuff that's like more like out there fantasy, which like, second world fantasy stuff. You have to ground it in some kind of way because there's so many crazy things that are going on. Like a magic system, like is crazy really when you think about it and all the rules you have to do. So you have to ground it because it has to have that believability and it has to have stakes. I'm a big Star Wars fan, and I used to love reading all the Star Wars books when I was a kid and teenager. But it got to that point, and there's a couple of fantasy books that do the same thing, like Raven E. Feist's Rift War Saga, where the main character becomes too powerful because there's every single book to kind of like learn new things, and like this magic that you thought you knew in the last book is like expanded. And Luke Skywalker was the same in these Star Wars books. Like every book, it was like he can pull Star Destroyers out of the sky now, and this he can do this, and he can do this, right? So each book was kind of then fallen over itself to go, okay, how can we keep this character out of the story for as long as possible because they could just arrive and just wave the hand and save everything. which I think is like a really kind of something that I kind of really thought about a lot when I was working on Empire of Ruin at first, is because you don't want a character that can just appear and just be like, I can just solve all these problems just really, really easily. So you have to kind of come up with rules and stuff that kind of does kind of put them in boxes and gives them realistic challenges. And that's the thing with Nick, because he is not a magical person, so he's in this world which is magical and it's, you know, supernatural and everything else, but he isn't. He's just a normal guy, so he's not going to be able to suddenly just click his fingers and solve it. He has to rely on his dubious skill set.
And one of the things I really liked about Nick, of many, was that even he is still stunted by these things that he's encountering. So Nick, excuse me, it's 9 a.m. here. So Nick is confronted by this new world that he wasn't aware of, trying not to do spoilers, that he wasn't really aware of prior to this thing happening. And now that he's awake and sees all these different things, he still has to find out, okay, what is this? How do I deal with this? And he has to find people who are familiar with the world to help guide him through. And I really enjoy that he's trying to figure out how to deal with this. And because of that, he has all of these different flaws, like picking up the Jack Daniels. And he's like, it's a Friday. It's fine. It's, you know, and just keeps going. And then pushing away some of the closer relationships that he has because he's just having such a hard time figuring out how to deal with this. And I love that in The Devil Walks in Blood, how right off the bat, he gets confronted about how he's doing this. And that's not something that was really put in his face in the first story. So, you know, I love that even though these are such fantastical worlds, there's still so much human element in your characters. And the same goes for In Solitude Shadow as well. You've got this really interesting dynamic between the mother and the daughter who are estranged. And I don't know that I've really encountered too many high fantasy, dark fantasy stories where that's a main storyline, where they were like, you know what? No, we cannot, for, again, trying not to be spoilers, for these reasons, I don't want anything to do with you. And I really liked the depth of that and how much that scar on their emotional beings affected their powers and how they drew their powers from around the world, how that emotional handicap stunted them in a way. I really liked that.
Thanks. That was yeah, that's an important. I'll tell you a little bit more why it was a bit of a cheat with Nick later on when we talk more about him. But with Infinity Shadow, that was something that was really important for me to try and get across, because it would have been really easy for me to make Cade Besson and Arlo the main characters, which I could have done, like, because they're both. I mean, Cade has his POV chapters, and Arlo is in all of Zana's chapters as well, and he is a very important character. And it would have been very easy to kind of, instead of having the Colleen and Zana relationship, I could have had that one as the main anchor of the story. But that would have been too easy for me because, like, you know, I'm male and so is Cade. I have a son, so does Cade. And I could have done that relationship and been thinking. So I really wanted to challenge myself and kind of get that relationship between mother and daughter to work, especially an estranged one. And because as well, it is unusual to see in fantasy. Like, it's usually people have always got daddy issues, right? and that's it. And I mean, it's not like what I tried to do as well was to the thing that has estranged them. I kind of really wanted to make it something that people would have their own opinion on as well, saying, well, you know, I would have done that in the same situation. Or would have been like, no, that has crossed the line, which is what the same characters say in the book as well. You have some people that agree with it, who are friends with the estranged people, and some people that disagree with it that are friends with the estranged people, which is just like real life. Mm-hmm. You know, you have these kind of decisions, or something happens, a fallout in the family, and people still want to remain friends with both sides, but they might not agree with them. And it's always very awkward and very it makes reunions quite interesting. And even like in Solitude Shadow, like two of the characters, Vettigan and Colleen, they're just like, this is why we never talk about this because we won't ever agree about it. And that's like, you know, as you get older, you have those conversations with people like your friends or your family, where it's like, we're just never going to agree about this. So it's not worth talking about.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that kind of ties into a lot of the race conflicts within your fantasy novels as well. And I was kind of curious about what was the inspiration behind the major conflict within that story and that whole series.
So yeah, like yeah, xenophobia is a big thread in that, and racism as well. But I wanted to kind of just turn the racism more into xenophobia as well, because just to at the end of the day, like I'm white and I'm male, I'm straight, so it's sometimes like it's I don't want to I want to shed a light on this sort of stuff, but sometimes I wouldn't understand a lot of these things, you know, like to a level that other people would, because I've never had to experience them. Um, from their viewpoint. So I wanted to kind of just really bring it back, but it's something that I think is important, and it's something that's like obviously when I was writing in Solitude Shadow last year, during 2020, we had, even though we were so kind of apart because of the lockdowns and the pandemic, which is like, you know, where the title comes from in Solitude Shadow, like it was written in solitude as well. Like I was writing it in the middle of the night during a lockdown. But I wanted to kind of dial in on the xenophobia because of I live in Ireland, but I grew up in England, and obviously England was going through Brexit, and it was going through, and there's this whole kind of mistrust of people from outside, and there was all the problems in America, and there was like the Black Lives Matter movement, and those people with all different opinions about that, and and it just occurred to me like I'm a quite a history buff. I do enjoy history, and I did it at university, and a lot of times people, and this is what was definitely happening in Britain, because I obviously even closer, I can follow it closer, but I'd suggest it was probably happening in America as well. Whereas that people they create social problems to distract people, and so they can get other things that they want to do, like government, so they can get other targets through. They'll try to distract people with things that are going on, and that is one of the things that I wanted to do with this empire in the Empire of Ruin series, is that they're just basically based on they thrive on war, because as one of the characters says at one point, war keeps people docile. They let people, they'll give up their liberties because they think it's for a greater good or whatever. So they're kind of always keen to keep looking for a new enemy, basically, where they can say, this is the enemy now, they've done these kind of different atrocities, this is our new enemy. And it's all just to kind of keep people away from having liberties, basically, and keep the powerful powerful and the weak. And so yeah, that's where that came from. It's probably just from like everything, you're right, and the stuff that's happening around you seeps into it. Like, you know, like I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan and study Tolkien's like life and work and everything, and he was definitely in the world he was writing with World War One, when he was in the trenches, and then going between that and the industrialization of England between World War One and Two, definitely affected. I don't think it was an allegory or anything for that, which some people would say, but it definitely affected the way that he was looking at the world and how he was writing and the themes that came into it. So yeah, that was a big part of it. And yeah, just the study of history, like the Roman Empire, was a big kind of influence as well. But like they're kind of like the anti-Roman Empire in a way, because like not to say that the Roman Empire was great or anything. That's not to verge into the life of Brian, what the Romans have ever done for us or anything. But like, you know, they would kind of take over different cultures and kind of assimilate them into the Roman way. Like, you know, like that's where a lot of their belief system came from, the Greek and what have you. You know, all their gods are just basically the Greek gods. Whereas the Helvetian Empire and the Empire of Ruin, they're just like, they take over and they're like, this is our way or nothing. Like there's no quarter. But they have their reasons. They have the reasons for doing things, and they think they're doing the right thing. So Well, remains to be seen if they were right or not, I suppose.
It was such a good read, and I ended up reading it on my phone, which I don't normally do because I ruined my eyesight at 17 from reading so much, and little tiny phone is not the most comfortable way of reading. But I was so captured by your story, and I used to work in human relations and international human relations, and I got to work with the most incredible people who had survived extremely drastic situations, things that, in our comfortable, situations that we can't begin to imagine. And I felt the echoes of those stories from people I'd known from Sudan, from Albania, and all these different places around the world in our modern context who had gone through these things. I felt so many echoes of their stories within yours. And so it really called to my heart in that way. And I just want to say thank you for shedding light on these stories, because even though it's a fantasy world, I mean, within our lifetime alone, so much of this last year alone, like you were saying, so much of this is still very relevant. So, in an interview I did with Anna Bushi, we were talking about how being a reader of various stories, fantasy, urban fantasy, doesn't matter, whatever it is, it opens our eyes as readers to the world around us. And even though these situations are, with elves or with wizards and witches, they still translate into our modern context and help us to have a greater understanding of the world around us. So, thank you for writing your true story and not worrying about censoring yourself in that sense. And one of the things that I did last year was I wrote a book called The Complex, which took place during a pandemic or an epidemic. They weren't sure what it was just yet. And everybody had to go on lockdown and was put in their houses and were told wear masks and, try to avoid going outside. And I got a lot of interesting feedback that was, don't write that story, it's still too soon. And I thought about it and then I said, no, because that's how we heal. That's how we process. And, your story in Solitude Shadow was titled because you were writing it in solitude. And I'm so curious to see how many of us authors were touched by what happened in the last 18 months and how that's going to come across in our stories. And, we were kind of joking that we're time travelers because we're 8 hours apart or whatever, but we're also time capsulators, if that's a word. And we are capturing this moment in history through our writing, through our way.
Definitely. I agree. And it's interesting. Like even like little things that crop in stuff like how we were talking before we went on, how the last 18 months we do so much stuff through video call. That works its way into In Solitude Shadow too, with the kind of the link between characters that they had. I only realized that when I was writing the second. I was like working my way through the second book, and I was like where did I get the idea? Like that must be what it is, because it's like so there's all these kind of things that just work. It'll be interesting to see books that are coming out in the next couple of years, and then people like looking back on it, and obviously outside of books as well, movies and stuff, because like movies are a great way to capture. They're obviously a few years later, they had like the Dark Knight, the Batman film, The Dark Knight was a big answer to fallout from 9/11, for example. And a few years after, and because that's just the way that films, it takes a while to make them. But it's always interesting to see that that 2, 3, 4 years after something's finished, just to see how it's ruminated with people. And as you said, a great way to heal and process it. You don't. It's difficult to process something when you're in the middle of it. It's when you're at the end of it. But I think trying to process things in the middle of it is also quite helpful.
Now, there's even a mention in the Nick Holleran book where one of the clients that comes to see him has a mask and gloves on. And he says just briefly, like, there hasn't been an outbreak in some time. It's fine. And that like jumped off the page at me. And I was like, oh, this is how recent this book has been written. And is that kind of a little mention of our 2020?
It was more explicit in the original version, because obviously I did the extended version of Dead Man Walking when the sequel moved to a different publisher, and so the original version of Dead Man Walking was just a novelette. It's actually half the length of the one that's out now, and when I had the rights for that one too, they'd reverted back to me, and it was only a short contract, thankfully. It's only a 3-month contract, which it shows you how quickly it was written. Right? I wrote it. I think I finished writing it in June last year, so it was about a year old, I think. Yeah. So in the original version, I actually do specifically say COVID, and there's not been a COVID outbreak because obviously the Holleran books in the main timeline is set in 2024, so it's like I wanted to set it in the future a little bit. Yeah, it was. And when I went to do the extended version, I just altered it a little bit and just took the COVID part out of it, because I was just like, because like you, I was kind of like, is it too soon? But I was more like, I didn't want to just kind of, just date it so much that it was like, this was written COVID pandemic, which it was, but but I just was like, kind of, I regretted it almost like as soon as I kind of, I got the final proofs back for the first version of it. I was reading it through and I was like, it's probably too late to change this. Like, I just leave it. And then I regretted it. So when I had the chance to go back to it, I was like, this is the first thing that I'm changing. So but I still want to have the same, because I think it's quite a funny joke, because he gets his comeuppance straight away from the joke, because he's like trying to be a smart ass, and then, like, the client removes her gloves and her masks, and he sees why she was wearing them. So so it works in the scene, but I was just like, the word COVID, I was just like, I don't know if I should have the word COVID in there,
Right. Yeah. I feel that. I definitely took that out of the complex as well. And it came down to that, of the date stamping it, the time stamping. And, we want our books to live forever. And about every 4 years or so, there's some new pandemic thing that's about to wipe out the world. So, just leave it open to chance as to whatever mask wearing situation we're in. So.
I think that was the funny thing, like going back to it a little bit, even though it was only, I went back to rewrite it in March this year. So it was only 8 or 9 months after I'd finished it the original time. But I think it was just because then I'd written In Solitude Shadow afterwards, and The Devil Walks in Blood afterwards. So I think it was that more experience as a writer where I was like, I wouldn't do that now, which is a great exercise to go back and kind of just look at things. Just, the story didn't change at all. It was just the telling of the story changing a little bit. And I added in some extra scenes that link more to The Devil Walks in Blood, like the character Charon. He wasn't in the original version of Dead Man Walking at all. So I added all, even like mentions of him were all added in. He was someone that I had in mind that I wanted to bring in straight away, but I just didn't have him in there. Again, it was the experience thing, and the publisher that published it, they wanted only no more than 10,000 words for the novelette as well. So it was kind of like those things that I wanted to do that I couldn't do. Yeah. So it ended up being double that for the Dead Man Walking extended, and then Devil Walks in Blood is double that again. So yeah, but yeah, it's funny. It's funny to go back, and I wouldn't do. I don't think I'd ever do it with Solitude Shadow, but it was funny to go back and just look at it and go, this is But I know some people do that all the time. Other authors that just go back and routinely rewrite the work and re-release them with new covers, and it's like new edition, and it's like, man, you could spend your entire life doing that.
You can, and that's what Tolkien did.
Yes, he did. Yeah. Man, there's so many different versions of the Silmarillion that you worked on.
Gosh, I know. And I actually had, with Animal Court and Foreign and Domestic Affairs, that's what I did. I'm on my 3rd edition of them, and I told myself, no, you may not go back, because if I open them, I'm going to be like, oh, I could change this and this. And it's kind of this horrible cycle we can get in. And I have a deal with my editor that after she gets it back to me and I send those proofs to the publisher or the proofer, I'm not allowed to touch it again. There is no going back. I can read scenes live, but that is it. I'm not allowed to open it again because I'll just keep kind of, oh, well, maybe little this, little this, and this. And it's such a funny catch-22 because with each book we grow as writers and we look back at our earlier works and it's like, oh God, like it's almost painful to look back at our first works. And we can definitely get stuck in that vicious cycle. So one of the things I do, like I said, is to try to set rules for myself. So second edition's cool, third edition's pushing it, no fourth.
Fourth is way out.
Now we have Nick Holleran, who is absolutely hilarious, and he drinks Jack Daniels during the story. And I totally understand why. But we chose wine, or you chose wine as your signature beverage. And would you, as a Californian that calls to my spirit, would you like to tell us a bit more about your choice of the grape?
So, funnily enough, no advertising, but this is from California as well. Because I really, really like New World wines. So that'd be like, California, Chile, New Zealand. I think
New Zealand's like great.
Yeah, I really, as a European, I should be stoned in the streets for this, but like I prefer them to European wines. I just think French and Italian ones are just a little bit too dry and they're not as tasty. Basically, it must be the sun or something. It must be just the more constant sun in like California and Chile, but that doesn't explain New Zealand because that's like island on the other side of the planet, has the same kind of weather system as Ireland. But yeah, so basically I like those ones. I drink red wine, and I love Californian, Chilean. They're my favorite. They're the ones that I'd always go for. If someone bought me a bottle of one of those, I'd be so happy to drink it.
So listeners, what he's saying is in his Amazon wish list, it is California label wine.
I did used to drink Jack Daniels quite a lot, and I stopped myself from drinking Jack Daniels when I was a young man. That's what I used to drink quite a lot. My brother used to drink it, and he's older than me, so it was in the house. So I was kind of like,
right.
I'll have a look at this, and,
So now I have to introduce you to Brothers Bond, which is a very good whiskey. And Dennis Crosby, who is a good friend of mine and one of the past authors I interviewed, introduced it to me. And it's made by the gentlemen who were the main actors in Vampire Diaries.
All
and
right.
They came out with this whiskey because during the show, they drank whiskey because it denied their bloodlust or the levels of their bloodlust. And so I am a whiskey drinker, and I opened up this bottle, gave it a little sniff. I'm like, okay, it's nice, light, caramely kind of smell. And I took a sip of it and I looked at it and I said, oh my God, this is pretty. And I don't think anyone in the history of whiskey has ever described whiskey as pretty, but it was so light and flowery, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful composition. And I've drank probably way too much of it in the time that I've had it, but it's a really good, smooth, easy sipper. And likewise, I'm currently drinking one from the Indian Valley, which I think is actually in Washington State, but I will fact check myself on that later. And listeners, if you're screaming at your radio right now, please let me know. I'm happy to be corrected. But yeah, there is definitely something about having our sip, whatever it is, and it can be coffee. It doesn't have to be an alcoholic beverage by any stretch. And there's something about having that comforting beverage in hand that either helps wind us into writing or just helps us to relax and get the stress of our day off, or empower us like coffee or tea and get us into the zone of writing. And do you find that you have like a time of day that you have a preference of writing, or is it really just whenever you can? Because I know you have a little guy on your hands.
Mainly it's at nighttime, which is like where I would have a drink when I'm writing, but not when I'm editing something. Then it's just like I don't drink anything but water because I'm just like focused. But if I'm in the writing process, I would have I find it just easy. Like you just have because I kind of speed type quite a lot. So when I have like a drink, then it just makes me stop and I just kind of have a think about what I've just written. And but then I also self-edit when I'm kind of going, not like full editing, but I'll go back then and just, so it's a vicious cycle really. Maybe I shouldn't drink when I'm writing. I just power through the whole thing. But yeah, it's mainly at night time because I look after my son who is 3. And he is in preschool now, so I get a couple of hours in the morning, so I'll do what I can in the mornings then as well. But it's just like, you know what it's like when it's not just writing a book, isn't just writing a book, it's all the other stuff that comes with it as well, like, all the like administration stuff you do, websites, social media stuff, all this kind of stuff. So during the summer when there was no preschool, it was just like my writing time came down quite a bit because I was doing a lot of that stuff at night time. But now while he's back in, I can kind of do all other stuff in the mornings, and I can do a bit of writing at night time then. But when I was in the full swing of it, I was kind of writing 6 days a week. And the only day I wouldn't write would be it was 6 days, because it was Fridays was the only day I'd take off from writing. I'd have just like a little relaxed time on Friday evening, but every other day I'd write. So I'm trying to get back into that habit again because it worked well for me, but I need routines. Like I'm a routine kind of person, which is, I think it's just something that gets drilled into you. Like, although actually maybe you're just one of those types of people, or you're not. And like, I definitely am. I need routines. I need everything set out. I've got really bad OCD, so everything has to be in the same place on my desk when I'm working, or else it's distracted by something. I have a little like Baby Yoda bobblehead, and my son must have moved it, just moved it. And I kept on just like, I was working, I kept on just looking at it. And I was like, that's not how I left it. And I was just like getting distracted. So I had to go and like, I ended up having to find like if I taken a photo of where it was, because I just couldn't get it right for ages. And I was driving myself spare, just like with this thing. And I was like, oh, I just need to find where it was. And thankfully,
so you need to outline its little space on your desk so you know where he lives. So that's his spot.
That's a really good idea. I will do that. I'm not joking. I'm going to do that.
This is what we do as writers. We exchange ideas and we grow. And this is what you're getting from me. Now, in the course of your writing, I with most of us, there's a lot of research involved. And I imagine that kind of a lot of research went into, if not in the moment, through your reading. So you're a prolific reader. I see you posting about, the different books that you're reading all the time on Facebook. When you were creating the Holleran series, how did you decide which paranormal or religious, and by religious, I mean across the board religions, beings? How did you pick and choose which ones for the story? And were there any where you're like, yeah, I really want this in there, but just doesn't fit?
Yeah. There was actually. I'm trying to sneak Lovecraft into there at some point, right? And I am doing it. There's hints of Lovecraft in there, right? One of the characters actually references the cult of Dagon at one point, like just saying that they're causing trouble out on the East Coast, right? And there is maybe an Eye of Dagon at some point towards the end of The Devil Walks in Blood. So that's something that I would like to bring. And I've got the scope to do it because I've given myself that kind of leeway to do it if I want to. So I would like to do that. And that's because one of I do enjoy Lovecraft's writing. And one of my best writing friends is a huge Lovecraft writer. And he has his own Lovecraftian world that's set in Cornwall in England, and it's all like Lovecraftian stories that take place in Cornwall. So I'd love to kind of reference that if I can, just as a little like Easter egg for him. I think he'd really, because he was one of the first people that I told about Holleran as well when I got the idea for it, and he was like really excited about it. So I'd love to do that. But in terms of picking the ones that I do, so Charon is in it for a very specific reason. He's and that's why I wanted to go back to add him more into Dead Man Walking, because he's quite integral to the overall plot of the book. There's going to be 5 books. There's a distinct storyline, which is starting to get revealed a bit more in The Devil Walks in Blood, but Charon is integral to it. So he's in it for a specific reason. Other than that, so there's the Amaroks in the first book, and that is because there's a car that drives past me every day, which is an Amarok car. And I always used to just look at the name and be like, that's a really cool name, isn't it? It's so new. I'd never seen another one in Ireland before, and I was like, and it's just in the place where I live, so it drives past me on the way out when I'm taking my son to school in the mornings, or if I'm taking him to play somewhere. So it just stuck in my head, and I was like, so I knew what an Amarok was, and I was like, well, then the one in Dead Man Walking is my own kind of spin on an Amarok, I suppose. And then the Wendigos that are in, that may or may not be in, but a hint of that anyway. That's because I thought it was a natural extension of the Amarok that I kind of created, and because of like the big bad guy in the Devil Walks in Blood, what his kind of power is, I felt like it would tie in quite well with Wendigos. But yeah, the next book, I've only kind of just sketched out. Like, I know the overall plan for the next 3 books, and where it's going to lead to, and I obviously know the title for the next one, which is called One Life Left. Yeah, and but I've not really decided on what kind of creatures or anything that are going to be in it, because obviously there's Nephilim in it as well, and there's like there's all different kind of things. I don't know. I would. I mean, there's hints of the Fae in it as well, obviously, because one of the main kind of weapons in Nick's arsenal is created using iron and Fae wings, and he has to basically go and hunt Fae to get the wings.
And he doesn't sound like much of a fan of them.
He doesn't like them. No, he doesn't like them. And I really feel that like I kind of want to open the 3rd book with something that's kind of disconnected from the rest of the story, and I have a feeling that like it's going to be him being confronted by the Fae for his crimes against the Fae for so long that he's been doing. So I think that's they're going to make I'm pretty certain they're going to make an appearance in the 3rd book at the time. But yeah, there'll be a lot more kind of Nephilim, more Charon, and more we'll see what else is going to be in there. There's a big subplot with his parents as well, which is like, what exactly are his parents, or who were they? Because he doesn't, obviously he thinks about them a few times, and he mentions them once or twice. And he kind of hints about going. He doesn't ever want to go back to where he lives, because the last time he was there, he found them doing something. So that's going to be a part of the 3rd book as well.
Very interesting. And I have about 40 questions I'm going to ask you after the interview, because I don't want to do spoilers right now, and I'm adding them all up. But right now, which brings us to our listener Q&A. And we have Michelle River, who reached out to me on Facebook, and she also had about 40 questions. So hopefully we answered some of those in the duration of this. And she would like to know, are any of your characters in Solitude Shadow based on anyone in real life? And what was the hardest part in the editing process?
Okay, so yes and no is the answer to that one. So Cade Besson is basically, and Cade is, and this is a really weird answer, because he probably has the hardest time out of all of the characters in the book in terms of like what happens to him. But because the reason I wanted to start was because he's like the most kind of normal character. He's just a regular person, and he was like in this world where like bad things can happen, and there's all this kind of magic and war, and I just wanted to show if a regular person got mixed up in it, what would happen to them. But he is very much like me, right? He shares a lot of my character traits and some experiences, and he's a father like I am, and all this kind of stuff. So he has a lot. So I don't know what that says about me, that I was like, I'm going to punish this person so much. Right. But then like in some characters are based on people that I've worked with in the past or come across, and many of them not in the most flattering of lights. So there's quite a lot of, there's a character called Garrett, who is quite an ineffective leader, and he's based on not one person in particular, but a lot of upper management people that I've come across in my life who are kind of they get there because it's not what you know, it's who you know, and they just it's all about like status, and that they want to kind of the bullies basically, you know. And he was yeah. Well, I kind of wanted to humanize him a little bit, so I worked on his backstory a little bit to kind of give him like a bit of a sympathetic slant. But in the original draft, he was just a straight up, just like, this guy is just the worst guy. He was based on a lot of that kind of stuff. But in overall, not just in Solitude, but like Nick Holleran is basically just an exaggerated version of me. So he has my sense of humor, he has my taste in music, food, most drinks, dress sense. He has the same. The only real difference is that he's American and he has hair and he doesn't have a beard. That's just literally the only difference, right? So but he's a massive schmuck as well, which I am as well, right? So so he's but that's why it's so easy to write, because it's just like, how would I react in this situation? What would I say, right? And it's funny because Michelle is the publisher that owns Erie River Publishing, and she actually was like, one time she's like, "This is so you," when she's like about something that Nick said, and I was like, "Yeah, I know." The hardest bit of editing in Solitude Shadow was Zana's character, and just getting so her storyline never changed at all during the editing, and there was little tweaks here and there for other people's, but hers remained, like, her entire arc was there straight away from the first draft. But the emotional side wasn't quite right. It wasn't quite working. She was too calculating, and I didn't want it to be like that, because I wanted people to empathize with her, and she is a person that has a lot of feeling for people, which is why she did what she did, and so that needed to work, and that was just trying to just eke out without getting too soppy, I suppose, and make it feel real. So that took quite a lot of work on her, actually. There was a lot of kind of back and forth on that, and just, is this too much? Is this not enough? But I think a lot of people responded well to her character and to the storyline between her and Colleen. So and her and Arlo as well, because she's the kind of center of the story in a way. Like, Colleen's on the cover, and Colleen would be, in my mind, would be the protagonist, but Zana is kind of the center which all the kind of storylines kind of spin off from and come back to.
Yeah, I liked how In Solitude Shadow was told, because it was multiple perspectives, but it was omniscient as well, which is how I tend to write. And I would have also pegged exactly those two, Colleen and Zana, as the main two. And as the book progresses, seeing then Colleen emerge as your primary character. But I wanted to return briefly to about Nick and how much of yourself you put into him. And I wanted to say, in your introduction to his stories, you actually brought up a very controversial point that has torn families apart. And even my own boyfriend and I go into massive debates about this all the time. And it's the matter of, does pineapple belong on pizza? And I am so glad to have found a kindred spirit who also thinks that pineapple does belong on pizza. So yeah. I know I'm listening about half my listeners, or losing about half my listeners right now, but dag nabbit, pineapple is good on pizza.
You know, it is. It belongs on. I just think it belongs in everything, to be honest with you. Drinks, pizza, salads, just everywhere. More pineapple, the better. And Nick feels the same way as well, which is...
It just gives it that zhuzh, the little extra zhuzh a pizza needs. Anything.
I think it's a really good way of, like, characterizing someone as well. A really easy way of doing it is just if you just throw in there, like, especially like with something that's set in the real world, it's like they like or don't like pineapple on pizza, and then you get a lot of people going, all right, yeah, I'm on this guy's side, or other people like, no, not for me.
Put it down. Yeah.
That makes it real. Yeah. It's so weird that it's such a divisive thing, really, because I mean, it's nice.
We get it. That's why. So our next question from a listener comes from Chris Banner. And this was also submitted on Facebook. And Chris asks, David has 2 amazing series out. So I'm curious if we'll be living in these worlds for a while, which I think we did kind of touch on. Or does David have other projects in the works for us while we wait for more of Nick Holleran and Empire's Ruin?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, but different. You remember before when I said I just say yes to all the questions, and that'll be it. Yes, that's good. So we've got Path of War, which is going to be the sequel to In Solitude Shadow, is going to be out in May or June next year. So it's been pushed back a little bit, but the reason for that is because people enjoy it. It was going to be originally just a novella series, okay, so a series of novellas, just a trilogy, but people have really responded well to it. But one of the main thing that even in, like, you know, when they're saying that they like it or they love it, however, but they wanted more of it. So we're going to extend it into not huge novels, not like 500 pages or anything, but it's going to be, the second one is going to be quite a bit bigger than the first one. But I'm also going to be doing a prequel, which is going to be we're going to be doing quite a lot of offers on it. So it'll be like, you know, that kind of stuff. So there's going to be a prequel coming out on for Solitude Shadow, which is to do with the Zana Colleen conflict. I'm getting really kind of into that one. So that one is then, and then Nick Holleran, there's going to be 5 books in that series. However, as I was telling you before, we're doing a special edition of book 2 with a new cover, and we're putting the first and second book into just one volume, so that's going to be there for people, and it's just going to be one book with a break in between, and I'll be going back. There'll be another One Life Left will be out towards the end of next year, I think. Before that, or before both of them, the first novel I ever wrote is going to be coming out at some point before that, and it's not fantasy or anything like that. It's just it's a straight up 1940s noir thriller set in Santa Monica.
Oh, how fun!
It's called The Santa Monica Man. So it's like I love westerns as well. I'd love to write a western, but I really love film noir. So like stuff like Chinatown, LA Confidential, The Big Sleep, Third Man, all this kind of stuff. I just love those kind of films. So this is my, but I don't really read that type of book, but I love those type of films. So this was my, when I was first learning how to write, I was writing a chapter at a time at creative writing classes. And I wrote it over the space of pretty much a year actually. And I just kind of finished it. And I was like, it's finished. What shall I do now? And then I just started looking around and submitting work to anthology. So I only finished it in like March 2020. And then I was just talking to someone who owns a publishing press, and they were like, oh yeah, I'll take a look at it, because they're into that kind of book. And then they read it, and then they were like, we're actually opening a mystery imprint, and we'd like to take it. So I was like, fantastic. So I got a chance then to go back and kind of rework on it a little bit, to kind of just update the kind of the writing style in it and stuff like that, and some other things, and then it's just been kind of edited now. So I think hopefully we're going to be bringing it out at the end of this year. But yeah, so it's set, it's set in 1949 Santa Monica, and it's about a guy who works in the police force who he gets a phone call early in the morning to tell him to go to Santa Monica Pier. And when he arrives, he finds a corpse sat on a bench, and he's dressed in like a 3-piece suit with a fur coat, and it's got all the tags and everything cut out of it, and there's no kind of ID on him and nothing like that. And he's kind of brought into this mystery of who this Santa Monica man is, and kind of has links to his past. The main character is called Tommy Holleran. No, not Tommy Holleran, Tommy Renfro, and Tommy Holleran. Geez, that'd be just like the combined everything.
I was like, my brain blew up. I was like, oh my god, are they related?
No, no, it's called Tommy Renfro, and it kind of there's flashbacks to his youth in Santa Monica up until World War II when he goes away to fight in World War II, and then there's the current the present day kind of thread of like this mystery as well. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it because it's funny though, because it's like it's just I spent so much time working on other genres and stuff that it's like it's complete straight. There's no fantasy. There's a couple of like trippy dream sequences and there's thrill. It's a thriller and there's some scary bits. Um there's some like scenes that are in World War II that are kind of like people might find a bit uncomfortable. That like the character had to see or was forced to do. But it's like it'll be interesting just to see how people kind of respond to it because obviously as well, like there'll be people picking that up who have never heard of me before, and they're like, "What's this guy done?" And it's like all this fancy stuff.
You've got a bridge in there. I mean, Nick Holleran's kind of a bridge between the worlds, so.
Exactly, that's what it is. Like that's what it was, and that was my thought process for Nick Holleran because I was loved fantasy so much, and I was like. And I had this Santa Monica man, and I was like, I could do something that like brings the two of them together a little bit, and that's how Nick Holleran was born.
Well, our last question here comes from Dennis K. Crosby, and he says, or he asks, I know the pandemic was and continues to be a challenging time for some writers. Did the pandemic affect you and your productivity? If so, how did you work through it?
I actually was one of these people that was more productive when it was in full kind of swing because especially with my son and everything, so I was kind of like we couldn't go anywhere, everything was closed, like so he couldn't go and play with children or anything like that. So we were at home or in the garden. Or go into the woods for stuff like that. And then as soon as he would go to sleep, I would just write all, all night until I went to sleep. And that was just the way it was like for months. So like at that time, and I was just still figuring it out because I only started submitting work to places in March, but just as the pandemic started. And I look back, I kind of I'm my own worst critics in some ways. So I look at what I've written this year and what work I've done, and I compare it to the year before, and I'm like, I did so much stuff in 2020, but then I've done quite a lot of stuff. But like I was, as things have started opening up again, it's you're trying to catch up on everything that we didn't get to do last year. So like holidays and weddings, and like so many weddings got rearranged this year, and like so there's people want to meet up and there's all that, which is great. Like it's great to see everyone again, but it's it is that kind of feeling, especially because it's been quite a nice summer where everyone's like, let's just go and do everything we can. So it's kind of gone that way. But the thing that kind of affected most is selling the books basically and getting them out there into bookstores because it's been so difficult to do that because the indie writing scene isn't huge in Ireland, and most of the writing scene is literary fiction. Like speculative fiction isn't particularly big over here unless you're a really big name. So a lot of that then is like getting face to face with book owners and indie store book owners and going in and saying like, this I'm a local writer and this and this, but they all want to do kind of book launches, so they're out saying, well, we're not going to do anything like this until we're able to do in-store launches and stuff like that because we want a certain amount of film. So it's kind of like that's been a struggle like inside of Ireland particularly, but things are opening up a little bit now, and there's Fantasy Con in the UK in a couple of weeks, which I'm going across to. I'm on a couple of panels and stuff like that, which is going to be really, really fun. And it's the first time I'm actually going to go somewhere with some of my books and go, look, I wrote these.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh my gosh.
That's one of the weird things. It's kind of weird because it's like I was saying to someone once, like, it's great. You get sent copies and like people want signed ones and you send them off to them and everything. But most of it's done online and most of it's done through like Amazon or whatever. And it's kind of like, when you buy stuff on a credit card online, it doesn't really feel like you bought anything. That's kind of what it's like. It's like I've written these, but it's kind of like I've not done it because there's no like,
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
yeah. So that's been the weird thing about it because it's all been kind of done like my whole kind of, if I can call it a career, which I don't really, because I don't really I'm just still so new at all this kind of stuff. But my whole kind of writing experience has been done in this pandemic bubble. So it's yeah, that's so I found it quite comforting in a way. Like there was other things that obviously annoyed me about it, and other things that like were anxiety about the pandemic and everything else around it. But the actual process of writing during it, I actually found quite a comfort, and I think that's probably why I did so much of it, because it was something that we're living in this world where there's just like so much stuff is out of control, and it was something that I could go, right, I'm going to go and sit down, I'm going to write for 4 hours, and it's something that I'm just creating, I control all of it, and I can just do this thing and forget about everything else for a while. So I think that worked for me, but I know people really, really struggled to be like creative during it as well, and I understand that too. But for me, like it was just like my kind of comfort blanket, I suppose.
And I hope that everybody out there listening has that comfort blanket of some sort, whether it's writing, reading, video games, whatever it is, that listeners or viewers, that you find that. And David, you want to tell the people where they can find you?
Yeah, so the best place to find me is if you go to my website, which is davidgreenwriter.com, and then there's a big sign up button for my newsletter. And that's the best place because it has all like my links and everything. And if you sign up to the newsletter, you get a free short story collection called Tales of Fire and Shadow. I think it's called. Yes, it is.
You've written so much at this point that the titles are just irrelevant. And once the book is done, it's out of the mind. I do the same.
Yeah. I think it's called, Tales of Fire and Shadow. Yeah, that's definitely what it's called. But yeah, you get that for free, and it's got all like my kind of links to social media and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I'm always happy to talk about anything really.
And you did so beautifully during this. And I want to thank you again for joining me here on Cheers, Dears. And thanks to everybody who watched and viewed this. Remember to subscribe and like this video, or to follow and like the podcast as you go. And again, David, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, no, thanks very much for having me on. Really enjoyed it.
And cheers to all your works.
Cheers.